little bit of Ojibwe, but I'll try speaking Ojibwe. Jim Northrup Nin Indigenous Cause Akanashi Moon. My name in the English language is Jim Northrup. Chibanesi Indigo Ojibwe Moon. I'm called Chibanesi in Ojibwe. Makwanin Nindu Dem. My clan is Bear. Nagachuana Nin Indunjiba. I'm from the Fond du Lac Reservation. Wapai Iganing Inda. I live in the village of Sawyer. Ingudwasi Midina Ashi Nizwaswe and Aso Bibunigis. I'm 67 years old. Kiki Fugitina, did you fart? I just knew I didn't see you're paying attention. I've been accused of many things. One of them is being a bullshitter. Really, I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. But being a bullshitter didn't pay anything, so I decided to call myself a storyteller. A little better, a little more prestige, but it still didn't pay anything. So I became a freelance writer. At first, it was more free than Lance, but eventually I started getting money for my words. But when I became an author, a poet, a playwright, and a newspaper columnist, I could charge consultants' fees. Greatly reduced for tonight, of course. I know how poor Pat is. He's right, we do go back a long time. Back to the North Shore, back to DeWitt sites. We've been reading and reciting poetry for many years. I'd like to share some of my poems with you. But first, I'd like to start out by saying I spent the first 4 years of my school life in Pipestone, Minnesota. It's a federal boarding school. When I was growing up, it was the policy at the time. Separate the little darlings from their parents and their language and their culture, and maybe they'll grow up to be brown-skinned, obedient citizens. It didn't work for me. I'm still Anishinaabe. I'm still speaking the language. So I wrote a poem about it. It's called Ditched. A first grader, a federal boarding school, Pipestone, said Ani to the first grown-up, got an icy blue-eyed stare in return. Got a beating from a second grader for crying about the stare. Couldn't tell Ma or Dad, both were 300 miles away. Couldn't write, didn't know how. Couldn't mail, didn't know how. Run away, got caught. Got an icy blue stare and a beating. Got another beating from a second grader for crying about the blue-eyed eating. Institutionalized, toughed it out, survived. I graduated from high school, 1961. At that time in Carleton, Minnesota, they told me I was the first Indian to ever graduate from that high school. I don't know if it's true or not, but I've been bragging about it ever since. I joined the United States Marine Corps shortly after high school. At that time, it seemed like there were only two choices available. One was the prison route, reform school, prison, and another was the military, and I chose the military. But I did spend some time in reform school. I spent 9 months down at Red Wing, Minnesota State Training School for Boys. I'd like to say that I stole a pig and it squealed, but instead it was a high-speed chase involving police and gunshots and beer bottles, and it got pretty ugly. Anyway, I spent 9 months down there getting reformed, and that's when I began to write. I had a journalism class in the 9th grade, and so we had to put out the school newspaper. So one time I wrote an article that was a series of questions, like how high is that bluff behind the school? How deep is the Mississippi out in front of the school? Who's the oldest staff member? About 15 general interest questions like that. And I said, answers on page 9 at the bottom. It was an 8-page newspaper. For months, people were coming up and asking me, where's page 9? That's when I realized that my imagination could make people laugh and could make people think. I come by this writing business honestly. My grandfather was a writer. back in the 1920s and 30s, back when they're still shooting us for our feathers. Little ethnic humor there. And so he broke the trail for me. When he did it, I knew I could do it too. So because there's another Vietnam veteran here, another Marine here, I'd like to recite some poems. I was honored to be asked to recite poems in Wisconsin last May. It was a Wisconsin State Welcome Home pageant for Vietnam vets, and I was asked to recite some poems. So I will give you those poems I recited. The first one is called Wannabe. I ran into one last week. I could tell he was a phony. He didn't have the eyes. Was he a door gunner or lurk? Nope, he's a Green Beret, Riverboat SEAL, Ranger Recon Marine. I listened to his story. He talked about the jungles, the rice paddies, the firefights, the weapons. I listened. He talked about mosquitoes, snakes, gooks, and the NVA. I listened. I listened until I realized we both seen the same Vietnam War movie. Nice try, fella. Don't steal my war. After I came back from Vietnam, I knew there was something wrong with my noodle. I wasn't the same happy-go-lucky guy who was getting involved in car chases with police and such. I knew there was something wrong with me. So this is a poem about what happened then. Survived the war, but was having trouble surviving the peace. Couldn't sleep more than 2 hours. Scared to be without a gun. Nightmares, daymares, guilt and remorse. Wanted to stay drunk all the time. 1966, and the VA said Vietnam wasn't a war. They couldn't help, but did give me a copy of the Yellow Pages. Picked a shrink off the list, $50 an hour. I was making $125 a week. We spent 6 sessions establishing rapport. I heard about his military life, his homosexuality, his fights with his mother, and anything else he wanted to talk about. At this rate, we would have got to me in 1999. Gave up on that shrink, couldn't afford him, wasn't doing me any good. 6 weeks later, my shrink killed himself. Ooh. Great. Not only guilt about the war, but new guilt about my dead shrink. If only I had a better job, I could have kept on seeing him. I thought we were making real progress. Maybe in another 6 sessions I could have helped him. I realized then surviving the peace was up to me.